Hello everyone and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and today I want to talk about why Joe Biden is essentially dead on arrival for the 2024 presidential election. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this. And so to preface this video, guys, Donald Trump, according to my model and instincts, he has a very high chance of winning the presidency. It's actually very high. It's actually about pretty much, I'd say, a 95% chance to win. And I know that sounds very facetious, but the reason why I'm saying this is because I have constructed a model in Google Sheets that has essentially allowed me to track the approval ratings of the incumbent parties, president in every single state, the difference between each candidate's approval ratings, a demographic model, the polling averages, and the results from 2008 and 2020, and allows me to track the swing and average trend from each cycle. And I'm able to basically put all of that together and have a secondary model down here, which basically factors in the difference of the candidates' approval ratings. And then this column over here, these results and these results essentially average out to get an electoral college map over here that we can essentially play around with. We actually see something really interesting here. This is very fascinating. A lot of people who have watched this channel know I have Donald Trump winning in an electoral college landslide of upwards of 343 electoral college votes, with New Hampshire being his closest defeat in a state. Now, what's very interesting is that Donald Trump right now leads the average by 4.1 percentage points. That is a huge swing to the right. It's like basically an 8.1 percentage point shift to the right. And Donald Trump has a 4-point lead in favorability nationally against Joe Biden. And that historically has been a pretty decent way of actually predicting where the popular vote is going to end up being. In 2016, Trump had a 37% approval. Clinton had a 42% approval. And if you basically saw that, that's a 5-point difference in favorability. And if you subtracted, 2 to 3 points for third parties, you would get a 2 or 3 point victory, which is effectively what we're kind of looking at for this year as well. That math is being factored in by the polling averages that I plug in, because Donald Trump on average is performing better in polling averages with third-party candidates included in it. And on top of that, we also see that in 2020, Donald Trump had a 46% approval rating. Joe Biden had a 52% approval rating. And if you look at that, that's like a 6-point difference, which is close enough to 4.5. So the approvals give you a good idea of where things should really end up overall. And we saw that a couple people who probably disapproved of Trump in 2020 ended up voting for him because of his job performance. That was something that we also noticed when looking at the approval rating differences as well. That probably basically explains that 1.5 percentage point difference. And so when you really think about it, it's actually quite interesting, because now with all this data that we have, Donald Trump would be on track for a landslide. But let's say that all of the polling data was exactly the same as last time. Let's say Biden led the average by 7.2 percentage points, which is what he led it by back in the previous election on election day. That would swing the national environment from 4.5 to 2.7 percentage points to the left. And if we look over here, the difference in their approval ratings was exactly 6.2 percentage points. And if you were to fill that out, you would get an electoral college battleground map that looks something like this on your screen, which looks very similar to the 2020 election. Now, you'll notice states like South Carolina, for example, are in the likely column. That is a 14-point victory for Donald Trump in that state. But even Missouri is not in that column. For example, Kansas is right below that safe Republican category. Even states like Iowa and Ohio are still likely in that column. Alaska is. Florida is now in the likely column, coming in at 8.4 percentage points for Donald Trump, which would be a 5-point victory or 5-point improvement from the last cycle. And what's very fascinating to actually see is that even when Donald Trump has the exact same disadvantage in the approval rating as last cycle, the exact same, the model still has him winning the electoral college while losing the popular vote by 2.2%, indicating about a 5-point error in the polling data, which, to be honest, based off of the stuff we're looking at and the fact that we've done national polling, that seems pretty realistic. A lot of the samples that are coming out recently have had very high Democrat national samples, which are not really going to be indicative of what an actual national environment would really be. So the model has North Carolina as a 3-point victory. That would actually be, about a 2-point improvement from the previous cycle when Trump won the state by 1.3 percentage points. If we look over here, for example, in the state of Georgia, the state is a tilt margin. It is a 0.8 percentage point victory for the former president. That would be, around a point improvement from the last cycle. And it would actually make sense because Donald Trump would be winning it while the state would be trending to the left, which I also expected to do so this cycle. So that would even make sense for Donald Trump to narrowly win it in a D+2 national environment. Arizona is basically neck and neck. That one could actually go either way, but I'll show you guys something in a second. The model has it as a 0.03 percentage point win. It's very, very close. Nevada is a 2.7 percentage point victory. That state has been trending to the left every single cycle. You see here, 2.4 percentage points victory in a 2.1 national Democrat environment. So that's there. And then now we see in 2020 the same victory despite the popular vote getting around 2 points more Democrat. And what do we see here? The national environment gets 2.2 percentage points more Republican, and the margin shifts about 4 points to the right. So it actually trends a little bit more to the right this cycle, but I'm actually not surprised to see that being the case, but this because the state actually has been trending to the right ever since 2008, and the model factors in the 2008 results. So I'd say that is not an uncharacteristic characterization of the state of Nevada either. Nebraska's second is a lean Democrat margin coming in at just 3 points. The district essentially was redrawn to be more favorable for Republicans, and I guess the elasticity score, which is something that I've also calculated, shows something really interesting. And just to let you know, guys, I haven't changed Biden's disapproval rating in any single state at all. His disapproval rating is still exactly the same. The difference between the candidate approvals are exactly the same. So none of that has changed. The only thing that has changed is the national polling data. That is all that's changed. So if Joe Biden had a 39% approval rating and Donald Trump had a, let's say, 34% approval rating, because that's what would have to happen for this to even occur really at that point, this is what you get. You basically have an election where Donald Trump still ends up winning because Pennsylvania would be a tilt Republican margin. Now, I'm not saying that Joe Biden couldn't win in this scenario, because he very well can. Some of these states would be within margin of error, but it's even the fact that even going back as far as an extreme as that, basically an 11-point shift in polling data, you're talking about the polls having to shift 11 points to the left for a result like this to even be possible in my election model. And we have basically never had a historical polling error of over 10 percentage points on the national level ever. The biggest polling data error was actually in 2020 on the national level of 2.7% in favor of Democrats that underestimated Trump. So these people that are saying, oh, the polls are going to underestimate Trump and they're going to overestimate Biden, I don't think they realize how large of a error it would actually have to be for the race to even be close at this point. Now, what's pretty interesting about the model is that Wisconsin is actually still blue. Believe it or not, it's a 0.4 percentage point win, and Michigan is actually a 1-point victory for Joe Biden. The reason why we see this being the case where Pennsylvania is red but not Wisconsin, I presume would be because of the fact that you do have a lot of, African American voters in the state of Pennsylvania that are actually shifting to the right, and Joe Biden's disapproval rating is a little bit worse in this state compared to Wisconsin and Michigan, as well as this is not factored into the model, but coincidentally, Pennsylvania is actually one of the states with the most Republican voter registration gains, even compared to Wisconsin and Michigan the past 4 years or so. So coincidentally, that would also line up with the victory in Pennsylvania being more Republican than Wisconsin and Michigan as well, which I think is a very fascinating development. And we also see a lot of 65 plus voters also moving to the left as well. So I actually wouldn't be surprised to see something like this whatsoever, where Pennsylvania votes to the right of Wisconsin and Michigan. So again, guys, this is what my model shows. That the polling data was exactly the same as last time, the model still shows a very competitive race to Donald Trump's huge victories. So these 538 models that have 500 electoral votes for Biden as a possible scenario are literally just not, it's just garbage. Those are garbage. The same way that they have Donald Trump winning by 500 electoral votes is ridiculous as well. I'll actually go ahead and pull this up and see if we could basically pull up their forecast here. To me, this is one of the most poorly constructed models of all time. You're talking about victories of 400 electoral votes possible for Joe Biden in this election. That is basically impossible. Same way they have Trump with 400 and something electoral votes here. That is also pretty much impossible at this point. Trump over 450 is basically going to be out of the realm of possibility. Now, these are actually more realistic than even this, because Donald Trump is closing in polling data in certain states like New York, Illinois, Oregon. All of those, if Trump were to flip all of those collectively, would essentially produce close to a 400 electoral victory. So those are actually more realistic even than these. And for some reason, one of the most common results tends to be 407, 408 for Joe Biden, which I find very, very suspicious that would be the case. And you see, look at all the national polling data. All the polls have Trump tied or leading the aggregate, but yet they have Biden winning the Electoral College. And the way they do this essentially is they basically, if we go to their fundamentals here, what they do is they essentially have the polling average, then they adjust it. So it basically looks at the effects of the party's conventions. I guess they use historical polling, movements to account for that, which I guess makes sense, because the whole point of this model is to not predict the election right now. It's essentially to predict what the electoral college margin would be projecting a few months into the future, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. You see here, one of their forecasts is actually the exact victory from 2016, which is really interesting. And then 2020, they basically factor in this popular vote model, which really D plus 29. Are we really being serious right now? There's no way that Joe Biden would be able to win the popular vote by 29. Same way Donald Trump wouldn't be able to win it by 29 either. But apparently Biden winning 497 electoral college votes is more realistic than Donald Trump, is more of a likely shot than Donald Trump getting 500. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. Same way this wouldn't happen either. This is also extremely unrealistic. Now, what's very interesting is that my result around here is, close to the center of the map there, which is really, really fascinating. But what you see here, what's very interesting is that they look at the forecast of the polling average. So they're basically like, okay, so first of all, we're going to basically apply historical polling errors to the party convention. Then we're going to project what we think the polling average is going to be. And then we have this quote-unquote fundamentals model. What does this fundamentals model mean? I don't really understand. Like, what is your fundamentals model? You just shift it 4 points to the left? Like, I don't understand what your fundamentals model is. Are you looking at demographics? Like, what are you exactly looking at? Are you looking at historical voting patterns in the popular vote, the way the percentage of the Republican, the Democrat candidate have been trending, which both of them have actually been increasing over time, by the way. So the Democrat winning the popular vote by 3 this cycle would just really not make a lot of sense. And then we have here Joe Biden in their final popular vote forecast winning the popular vote by 2.7, which realistically, if you were to actually look at their election model and see, okay, is he winning it by 2.7, this would actually be a realistic result. So yes, their projection based on their popular vote technically makes sense, but the problem is that they're not being honest. They're saying we're going to project into the future what we think is going to happen, which is not really a good way of doing this kind of stuff. I mean, you could make your best educated guess, but that's not really the best way of doing it. And we show with the current polling data, Donald Trump outperforms the polling data, because that's always what happens. But we don't have any programmed election model polling error factors pulled into this. Like, that's not how it works. And so a lot of these margins don't even make sense. Like, Pennsylvania is D plus 1. No poll has had Biden ahead in Pennsylvania at all. None in a long time. That literally makes no sense at all. That makes zero sense. Biden's odds actually went up since the other day. That's ridiculous. That is actually insane. that we even have that. And if we look, like Georgia 1.3, really? The median margin there is like R+4. In the polls there tend to be a little bit more accurate. Wisconsin, you're telling me Wisconsin is voting to the left of Pennsylvania? Like, what do you, well, technically I do have it voting to the left of Pennsylvania, but again, really there's barely been any polls with Wisconsin being D+1. So it's like Arizona, the same thing. Donald Trump has been leading all the polls by like over 4 or 5 points. Same thing in North Carolina. Michigan, Joe Biden hasn't led a poll since like last month there. Florida, 4.5? Really? Like, the polls there haven't been any closer than like 6 points. Like, and polls tend to underestimate Donald Trump in the state. Texas, 5? So you're telling me that Joe Biden is 20 points less favorable than he was before, but he's somehow going to improve in Texas? But Donald Trump improves in Minnesota and New Hampshire? Like, honestly, guys, this is absolutely ridiculous. The fact that we even have a model like this, because they are being extremely dishonest with the way that they're conducting this. I don't really understand what's going on here. They even have Michigan as lean Democrat. Meanwhile, Biden, if we actually, like, look, they even say, it's actually ridiculous that they even do this. Like, they say that Texas is a likely tipping point state. Like, are you kidding me? Like, Texas is not even competitive this cycle at this point. And so that's why it really infuriates me that this is, you know, the fact that Biden even over like 320 is a possibility according to their model just completely gets rid of their credibility, because Biden had everything going for him last time and didn't even get over 320 and led the average by 7. So it's like, really? Like, come on. Like, I don't understand this whatsoever. This model to me is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way you can have Biden winning the election by 2 when Trump is leading the average by 4 points on RCP. There has never been a polling error of 6 points in a presidential race ever. And when the polling errors have been, you know, over a point, they've usually always underestimated the Republican candidate either way. So to me, this is absolutely ridiculous that that's even being the case as of right now. And so that is essentially it, guys. This is why, you know, Joe Biden, I believe, is essentially DOA right now, because there's literally, even in a scenario where the polling data is identical to the 2020 cycle, you still get a victory in Pennsylvania for Trump. You still get Georgia. You still get Arizona, which technically, yes, they'd still be up for grabs. Yes, they'd still be competitive. But the fact that I can't even draw out an actual Biden victory in any of the model possibilities between a D+7 national environment and an R+4 national environment is extremely bad news for Joe Biden. All of his election scenario possibilities have essentially gone out the window almost. It would be a very low probability for Joe Biden to actually be able to win the presidential election. If you were to do like a D+10 all the way to an R+10 popular vote differential, like a 20-point spread, Biden would barely be winning any of those election victories at all. He would barely be winning any of them as of right now. And so if you guys did enjoy this analysis about the 2024 election, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in another video.